Welcome to the Climb Podcast, where we empower women of color in the pursuit of leadership roles. I'm your host, Felicia Smith, the founder of The Climb, a 501c3 organization committed to increasing the number of women of color in leadership and managerial positions. Each week, we dive into topics that have been mystified and give you the practical, real, and relevant on how you navigate in these spaces as women of color. And today, our topic is working as a woman of color in the nonprofit sector. So I spent a lot of time working in federal government, but that is not the same thing. And so I've been having really good conversations with our guest today, and she's really going to give us I will say the download on all those pieces. And so I'd like to welcome you all to Majean Lorth. Majean, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm so excited to have you.
Yeah, thank you, Felicia. You and I have been talking for a while now, and I thank you for inviting me on. Every time we talk, we come up with some great ideas and topics to talk more about. So good thing we're on here today to talk more about being in the nonprofit sector.
Yes. Majean is an executive champion of The Climb, but you also probably saw her just in July. She was a part of a panel discussion that we had. And so you can check that out on this YouTube channel also. But I will start by reading her bio again because some of you are just meeting her for the first time. So Majean Lorth is a certified life and career transition coach with over 2 decades of experience in the nonprofit work and the mental health field. She's the founder of Transitions Well Done, a coaching practice committed to centering the lived experience of women of color as they navigate some significant life transitions, with a focus on self-exploration and resilience building. Majean specializes in understanding and addressing the unique challenges faced by this community through targeted services designed to navigate personal and professional transitions. She equips clients with the tools, and confidence needed to succeed while prioritizing their well-being amidst cultural identity, social expectations, and systematic barriers. Her approach fosters professional growth, for personal fulfillment, and a strong sense of community among women of color as they navigate these life challenges or changes. Again, thank you so much. And so this is going to be our regular type segment, guys, where we're going to go through a little bit at the beginning about our research, and then we're just going to dive in. So let's start a little bit talking about your journey, Majean, in the nonprofit sector. Like, how did you even decide that you wanted to work in nonprofit?
Yeah, it's a sector that found me pretty early on in life. I would say I was fortunate enough to have been exposed to a few career pathways through internships and activities starting, in high school. And I tried a few things and ultimately felt most at ease when I am in direct service of others. So within the nonprofit sector, I've had the privilege to do work in social justice, philanthropy, working with people with disabilities, families experiencing homelessness, college students in education, and mental health counseling. So the range is pretty broad for me and the work that I've been
Yes.
able to do in nonprofit. And I would say that started when I was 14 years old, and I've been stuck on that.
Wow, 14? Wow, that's
Yeah,
awesome.
yeah. It
So
started
that
at
that
a
that that's a calling.
Yeah, that is a calling. Started at a community center where I grew up in East Boston, Massachusetts. My job was to teach my peers about safe sex. So
At 14. Wow. Did you enjoy that job?
it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun
Okay.
because we had different props to work with. So
All right. Right. I think at 14, I'd have been a little shy teaching about safe sex. Like, wait a minute, I'm supposed to be teaching it? That's
yeah, yeah.
awesome.
Yeah.
Wow. So go, you know what? That was a good segue. Let's go ahead and dive into Someone Should Have Told Me. And in this segment, we break down all the things we wish someone would have told us in our careers that would have made our journey a little bit easier. So what are some of the things you wish someone would have told you about working in nonprofit?
I wish the importance of self-advocacy came up pretty early on, because you can't assume that your work is going to speak for itself. You need to advocate for your own well-being and your own advancement. And the nonprofit sector is vast, but it also is very small. So I wish someone had told me that I don't need to stick with the small nonprofit lens. I could work for a big corporation and that has a small nonprofit like to it. I could work for a foundation. I could work for a university, but it was mostly gearing me towards small community work, which is important. But there were so many different pathways I could have taken with that, but I didn't realize it until I was knee deep into what I was already doing. So that's one of the things that I wish that someone had said to me. And I brought up the self-advocacy part is because oftentimes you need to tell people about you. Don't wait for them to tell you who you are and how you do your work. And so rather than making sure that I'm going the direction I want to be, I was just being guided without advocating for myself and knowing where my values are in alignment. So I wish that was brought up more. The other piece to it is that burnout is real.
Oh,
And
come on. Come on.
and to learn to set boundaries pretty early on. I don't think I've worked in a nonprofit role where I wasn't on call, right? So
Wow.
even if you have the 9 to 5 job, most likely you carry. I remember having a beeper. So
That's how long.
that's 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 how long it was, having a beeper and being beeped at night. So it's always it's often crisis driven work, and so that's why the on-call is often a part of the job. And so you are taking all of this on but not advocating for what the time that you have for yourself, for your family. And it really can creep up on you where you start losing your passion and your commitment for the work. So that's something too I wish they had said, focus more on in my education or even the internships that I had.
That's actually really good. And I wonder, I mean, because it can be such rewarding work, but if it becomes work, 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 do you lose the reward piece because you're just so wound up in the day to day?
It is important and impactful work. And there's a part to it that it can be so draining because of what you're seeing day in and day out. Something we talk often about in the nonprofit sector is vicarious trauma, right? Because the population that you're working with, they have experienced or they're experiencing trauma, and especially if you're in the direct service role, you are having to live through that as well because you are so intertwined with the work that you're doing. So I think that's why it's important to keep in mind the burnout and seek support early on. Because yes, there are ways that the company, the organization you're working with will have policies. But then when there's a crisis that comes up, you have to be able to know, like, okay, what's urgent for me and what's urgent for the company that I'm working with.
That is good. That's really good advice. I love that. So you kind of already dived in just saying what you wish you knew, some of the challenges, but are there or were there other challenges that were kind of specific to working in that space as a woman of color?
So one thing I would say is that the lack of leadership representation, lack of representation in leadership roles would be one thing. And I think that's across industry. But if you think about the nonprofit sector, only 14% of women of color hold board seats. And that's a direct reflection of the systemic barriers to leadership in the nonprofit sector. And there's specifically, and I think you and I were just emailing about this, the broken rung.
Wrong, yes.
Yeah, because in the nonprofit space, there's a lot of room for entry-level work where anyone can come in and do the work. And then, more recently, you've seen more women of leader in the CEO role, but there's this gap of middle management, of leadership in the middle, that there isn't a clear pipeline to that. And there isn't any clear, transparent criteria on how to get to that. So it's, okay, we're going to bring you in, but how do we help retain you and how do we build your skills so that you can move up the ladder?
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And that's actually good because to your point, that is a part of most industries. But even if there isn't a actual tunnel or kind of guide or qualification of how you get to mid manager, it's challenges because you don't even know where to start. So
Yeah.
that's a part of the problem. So let's go ahead and switch to our next segment, which is called Truth Is. And Truth is where we dive into the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And we're going to talk specifically to working in the nonprofit. So, what are some steps do you think that they can take to provide more support for women of color in, that nonprofit sector? Like, what are some things that can be done?
I think creating a clear pathway or clear pathways for advancement and making sure that pretty early on employees are aware of what those pathways are and managers and leaders know how to make sure that they're moving women of color through those pipelines and not holding on the information close to them as there's some kind of a secret, but also sharing it. It builds morale when people know that there's a clear upward mobility in the company, that the organization that they're working on. But oftentimes you get thrown into a role and it's more reactive rather than proactive. It's not communicated early on that, okay, we are intentionally building your skills to move you up the ladder. Here's the pathway on how you get to this. Here are the professional development resources available to you so that you know how you getting to it. Oftentimes what's happened and has been in my experience and also with the women that I'm coaching, it's, oh, something happened, we lost funding or someone left, and it's, oh, so and so, are you, is that something you're even interested
Right.
in? Or you get bypassed and you're wondering, when did that posting go up? And
Mm.
so there's a level of clear communication around the upward mobility in nonprofit organizations that I think is missing.
That's interesting. It actually makes me curious. As we talked about earlier, working in nonprofit and the work being rewarded and oftentimes working so close to whatever the mission is, do you find that even within that organizational structure that people are closer or because you all are working, or is it still, and I don't even know if I'm asking this question the right way, is there still kind of a separation, meaning that when it is time to go to that next level, is someone like, hey, I think Maygene could do it because we've been working so close? Is there kind of a camaraderie there because of the work that you do?
Think so because the nonprofit field tend to be smaller. You have smaller organizations, and if especially if you're working within a certain niche, then your name can get thrown around quite a bit. But I do think the same issues that every industry sector face, the nonprofit face as well, no matter how small it is, which is, you know, oftentimes the population that we're serving are marginalized groups on under-resourced groups, and then the people who are doing the work directly are from those groups as well. And so, but upper management leaderships, the C-suite is mostly white women or women, white men. And so yes, I think to a point it's closer, but then when you get further up, there's the distance is still the same as with other sectors.
Yeah. And I mean, I would guess that even being in that scenario, because when you get up there, there's probably, like you said, white women or white males, that there is the opportunity, or not opportunity is probably a bad word, for you to feel like your voice may not be heard or that you're marginalized. And I read a study, and guys, I can't remember exactly what the study is right now. I'm going to put it into the show notes, about women of color working in nonprofits. It really was specific to the Washington, D.C. area. But that was one of the things that one of the ladies shared, was this feeling of when she walked in the room, someone would look at her and say, hey, you're not supposed to have this job. You're actually sitting in my job. So instead of it being a Black job, it was somebody else's job that they thought. So do you find, or the whole piece about being marginalized, like how do you recommend people handle that or deal with that in the nonprofit sector?
Well, I think conducting regular bias and cultural competency trainings at all level of the organization, in my experience, not so much now, but earlier on in my career, what I noticed as I was coming up is the cultural competency trainings were directed towards direct service staff and not necessarily
Mm.
towards management or leadership, right? So, and there's been plenty of stuff happening on the national level to shift that a bit. And you see with a few bigger organizations putting out trainings for CEOs, executive directors, but I think sometimes it's where's the accountability, right? So yes, you go to the training and you see people attending the training, you give them the books, you do the scenarios in the classroom, but who is holding them accountable to the work that's actually being done on the ground in those organizations? And then the other piece is that making sure that DEI is not just performative, but it's embedded in the organizational culture. Again, I'm going to use, similar terms that I used before, which is what often happens is that there's an issue or challenge that comes up, and that's when everyone is reacting,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
It's not practice on a daily basis of how is this really entrenched in the work that we're doing? How are we breathing it in and out every day so that it's not like, oh, now we're thinking of how do we respond to this national issue or this community issue that's come up or an internal issue. So being more proactive in that sense, I think would really help.
So if you knew today a woman of color, a little Black girl, whoever, who was in a space where they didn't have bias training and she felt like in some ways she was being marginalized, what advice would you give her?
So the first thing I'm going to say, and I'm going to say it with a caveat, is address the issue directly if it's safe to do so.
That's good. I like that caveat.
Because we know that there are power dynamics in play, right? We know that yes, we talk about having psychological safety in the workplace, but
Mhm.
again, how is it practiced, right? You're the person who's experiencing that. So if it makes sense for you to address it directly, then you can do so. It's actually, I'm working with a client currently, and she decided to reach out for coaching after she was in a meeting with her boss who has eroded her confidence just because of the way they have just marginalized this women of color, and
Mhm.
she has found ways to cope with it to the point where she doesn't even notice it when it's happening. So the last
Mhm.
time it happened, it was in a meeting with a group, with a team, and two of her coworkers after the meeting said to her, I didn't like how so-and-so talked to you. And she's like, actually, that wasn't so bad. So that that recognition of that wasn't so bad, that's telling in itself.
Yes.
So,
People
and
succumb to the trauma. You're like, you don't even realize it's trauma anymore because it's just a part of life.
right, you just going in, putting your head down and doing the work, and there's been worse scenarios. This is not, but the fact that someone is pointing it at two people pointed it out to her, and her saying that's not so bad clicked for her. Like this can't continue. I need help with that. So our focus is rebuilding her confidence. And I say rebuilding is because she has the confidence. She's doing the work, the actual work she's doing. But when it comes to addressing this, she's the only woman of color in a couple hundred people in the team,
Wow.
right?
Wow.
How isolating is that?
That is. Wow.
And
It
you
is.
need
I
the
mean,
job, you like the
yeah, you
job,
need that job. So how do you coexist in that space?
right? And so, when possible, addressing it directly and also documenting instances of when this is happening for if you want to bring it up to HR, escalating it to that point when necessary, and finding allies in the workplace for you. And again, that comes with knowing who to trust when you're navigating something like that. And I mean, the last case is reflecting on whether the environment is supportive of you, your growth, and just considering alternatives. And that could be, so many different things, but you don't always want to start there. But so I would definitely say address it directly and then collecting documentation of when it's happening, that when you do decide to address it directly, that you have evidence of it.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask you a question that I'm curious about, but I didn't mention. So, people talk a lot about a workforce being psychologically safe or feeling like you can have that discussion. But what does that really look like? How do I know that I'm in a place where I can have that conversation? How do I even know? I mean, besides the power dynamic, because one of the things I came up in the generation of speak truth to power, right? I'm a firm believer in that. But to your point, I feel like there are levels to speaking truth to power. Like I can have a truthful conversation without it being damaging to the relationship, but that is different than making sure that the environment is psychologically safe. Can you give me like an example of something that'll help me out?
Yeah, so I think it's starting with reflecting on the relationship you have with the team or with the person directly that you're wanting to have the conversation with. If it's, if you have a good relationship with the person, usually having that foundation can help you. And you can start by addressing it with, let me share one thing with that person, see how it is. One thing that I often think of is when you go in, before you go in, practice it with someone.
Yeah.
Practice having that conversation with someone to make sure that when you're in that room, they're not gaslighting you, right?
Oh my goodness, talk about it. And oh, the days I always feel gaslighted. And you think to yourself, am I being gaslighted? Like being gaslighted right now?
Yes, it often is happening because the person is thinking like they have good intention in the way they're responding to you, but they're not thinking of the actual impact, how it's lending for you and how you're walking away on that. And I've had that happen to me, a few times early on in my career when I'm thinking I'm addressing it and in the room, it's happening so fast
Yeah.
that I don't even know, like I wasn't prepared to know how do I respond to that or how do I pause? Let me pause for a second and like rewind what you just said to know what you're saying. And it's anxiety provoking. And that's a lot of times why we stay in places that maybe are not in alignment for us, because having those courageous conversations, right? Those are often really hard to do. And the implications of it, you have this conversation at 10 o'clock, but then at noon you have a lunch meeting with everyone, including the person you just talked to. So I really think like role playing it with someone that's not in the office is good, so that if, to even say, if so-and-so respond that way, what would you say? Right?
Yes.
That's
Yes,
that's
that's so good. That's so good.
Yeah, because oftentimes we go in not thinking, oh, this is how they're going to respond. Have like scenario A, B, and C. If they respond in this way, here's how you would respond, and how you would, again, making sure that you're grounded in your purpose for having that conversation. We can walk away feeling like we took care of that person rather being listened to.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so good. That's so good. Because I've definitely been in one of those conversations where first of all, I didn't expect the way it went. And I felt really gaslit. I won't say gaslit in the conversation. And I was just like, well, this was weird. And I walked away feeling like, what just happened here? So I love the practice scenario piece and really understanding the dynamics and the situations. I love that. That is good.
And
Would you,
that's actually something I did with the coach when I was in a similar situation and I had a coach. We worked through that together, and that was so helpful because, you know, the person's reaction, especially sometimes when you're giving feedback to people who may not be open to receiving that kind of feedback.
yes. Yes.
You touch a nerve, right? Especially with the topic, DEI topics, marginalized topic, things like that. And so you want to walk in knowing that you have a backup plan, or even to say, you know what? Let's stop. If it's not working for you, be okay to say, let's stop and let's revisit it, right? Don't feel like you have
Yes.
to follow through the entire thing, because that's emotional work.
It is. It is. And the truth of the matter is, courageous conversations are few and far in between, that most people, which I still don't like to have uncomfortable conversations, and they don't like conflict. So they will do whatever they take to avoid the conversation. So whether that is say, I'm not quite sure what you're talking about, or to just say, oh, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, just to get you away,
Yeah.
but they're not really necessarily taking in what you're saying. So yeah, there's an art to having those discussions in a way that's meaningful. So I love the practicing and understanding what your intention is going in, because I've had a couple of them that expected.
Same. Same.
So I love that piece. Well,
Yeah.
you've dropped a lot of gems already. So I think that we should probably transition to our final segment, which is called Another Rung Mended, or Another Rung Climbed.
Mhm.
And really, this segment is based on the broken rung, right? That talks about how women of color have this hard time climbing the ladder to get into those managerial and leadership positions. And so our goal of the podcast is to mend those rungs so that we can climb. And so in this segment, we really want to kind of hone in on those final messages that we want, every woman of color listening to take away. So you said this at the beginning, and you talked a little bit about self-care, but what are some practices that you find essential or that you've used that have been helpful in maintaining yourself in those challenging situations?
Yeah, and I think I said this in the beginning too, and it's so key is setting boundaries. Having
Yes.
what your knowing what your boundaries are, that is so key. Knowing what's an emergency for them and not for you, what's
Yes.
urgent for you, for them and not for you.
Hmm.
Knowing those distinctions, I think, are key. It's if you are in a situation, let's say, where you're really trying to move up the ladder and you feel like you have to give your all, you have to be the first one there, you have to be the last one there. Promise you, no, you
Like,
don't.
I promise you, that's not the answer.
That
No.
is not the answer because that builds up resentment, right? Especially if you're putting in all that work and you're not seeing the shift or you're not seeing where it's leading you, then you're being pulled away from what your passion is and what your commitment is to the work that you set out for to do. So setting boundaries is key. And I have people who've said this to me in most places I've worked at. I really admire you for taking time off because
A side compliment that
I
feels
don't
like
care how they meant it. I'm gonna say thank you, and I am taking that day or that month or that time off.
a side. It's a little, it feels a little bit back when people say to me, and maybe this is probably my own projection, but like if I'm gone for a day and I come back and someone says, "Welcome back," I'm like, I was just off Thursday. Like, fuck, welcome back. I was gone 2 days. You act like I was gone for a month. It feels a little like a backhanded compliment a little bit.
Yes. Sometimes the part of like, I admire you for taking time off and things like that. I'm always like, I don't know if I'm doing something out of the ordinary. I have the time. Or they
Obviously, you
say,
are.
you're making good use of your vacation. What was I supposed to do?
Was I supposed to not use it? Was it a trick? Give it to me and I don't take it?
Right? Like when I'm at work, I'm at work. I will do the work and I'll show up. And that's the other piece of like how you're showing up. Because if you treat yourself, the way you treat yourself is the way others are going to treat you, right? And that's at the workplace, at home, wherever you are. So if you're protective, I've had people say to me, I was going to call you, but I know how you are about calls after work. I'm like, I'm glad you know.
Boundaries. That's what that is. Boundaries.
Boundaries.
I love that. I love that. I think everyone should have them. And someone should say they should be thinking about you in your context before they reach out. Like if they just think they can just reach out whatever, whenever, then that means there isn't any boundary there where you've said, this is what I'm willing to do. And this is where it's gone a bridge too far. I love the fact that they said that.
Yeah, and the piece of it is in the nonprofit sector, those are things that we are typically helping our clients understand, right? But as staff, it's like it's one of our blind spots. We
Wow.
are blinded by again, the drive, especially if you're, on the path to leadership, to manager. But the things that we are making sure that our clients know about and can practice in their day-to-day lives, we're not taking that in. We're not practicing it for ourselves, right? And again, you as a leader, you are a role model for your team, right? So if you're always working, 9 to 10, whatever, 9 to 10 p.m. at night, whatever time it is, take a moment to pause and reflect on that. What is that telling my team? They might start to, think that you're expecting them to do that too, right? Or if they
Agreed.
get the 10 p.m. email from you, they might think that you're expecting them to respond. So there's always, like, it's a domino effect. You always have to be thinking in that way. And the other thing that I would say is know who your people are. So they may not be in the workplace with you. They may be outside of the workplace. They may not be in the nonprofit sector that you love so much. It could be somewhere else, but definitely know who your people are and who to reach out for. And share, when I say this, hear me, share everything that's happening, because sometimes we hold on to these things and we don't know that this is not acceptable, right?
Yes. Yes. Good. Yes.
Right? Until you're talking to someone about it and they're like, wait a second.
Crazy. Crazy.
That's not how that's supposed to be happening. You know what I mean? So not what I mean by share everything is be open to being vulnerable
Yes.
once you
That's
know who
tough
your
too.
people are.
Yes, that's the caveat, knowing who your people are, because often people want you to be vulnerable in a place that you don't feel is psychologically safe. That's my new word now.
There you go.
But to your point, you have to know that person's your person, so that when you share, you don't feel like you're judged, or that it's going to filter, out to others. So I
Right.
love
Or it's
that.
gonna come back to hunt you, or oh, you would share this, so that's why it's important to know who your people are, and who your people are because they are consistently showing up for you.
Yes.
They're consistently, helping you pave the way without anything that has to do with them. There's not a reward for them. It's not a quid pro quo. It's just, they're there to support you and be your cheerleader and you're your champions.
Exactly. Exactly. Ding, ding. So what would you want the next generation of nonprofit leaders? What are your hopes for those women of color who are coming up?
To not be afraid to take up space for yourself and asserting your ideas with confidence. That's something I had to grow into. My cultural background is, you're not here to be seen or heard. So I definitely had to really build that. And I built that with the nonprofit work that I've been able to do. So definitely do not be afraid to assert yourself, your ideas. And then continue to invest in your environment, in your time, in your energy. Those three things are key. Definitely your energy. If the work that we do in the nonprofit sector, yes, it's meaningful, yes, it's impactful. You have a mission, you have a vision that you are working towards, but then it can really take a toll on you. So being mindful to invest in your time, energy, in your environment, that's key. And I say that because a lot of times we don't know what the resources are. It took me a really long time to know that as a leader in a nonprofit organization, I had access to employment assistant programs.
Mm,
And that's outside of your health insurance. And they cover something else that health insurance doesn't cover that you may need. So definitely reach out and find out, read with a fine tooth comb what the employee benefits are, because the organization is requiring of you to show up. So how do you show up? You show up by taking care of yourself and finding mentors and sponsors who can help you advocate for yourself and who can open doors for you. And to not be afraid to do the same for others who are coming up as a leader, to not be afraid to mentor someone. It doesn't have to be in a formal capacity. And even if you don't have the bandwidth to do that, if you know of resources, if there was a program that you did that helped you, don't be afraid to share that. And I think that was really helpful to make it more of a collective rather than, crab in a barrel sort of thing.
I love that. That is such great advice. This has been amazing. I've learned a lot about the nonprofit sector that I probably did not know. And now I'm going to be ensuring that I'm creating psychologically safe spaces for everyone. So
I'm
this has
so
been perfect.
glad.
Yes, I know, right? You hear a term, but you don't necessarily take it in. I think particularly in this time, we use a lot of terms in
Yes.
the year of our Lord 2024. Like we throw terms at people, and sometimes we are guessing what we think they are, but I think it is very helpful and very good for people to ask questions and say, well, what does that really mean? How does that mean in proper context? So thank you for sharing that with me. But Maygene, again, thank you for coming on the podcast. I'd like you to tell the audience how they can get in contact with you, where they can find you or follow you.
Thank you, Felicia. And I enjoyed the conversation with you. You and I could go on for a really long time.
Yes, we
So
could. I
So
love
I
it.
am so thankful for you leading and facilitating this conversation, because this is really like my jam since I've been doing it for over 20 years. So I could really go on, but you can find me at Transitions Well Done. That's my website. Also how you find me on Instagram. As Felicia shared in my bio, I am working with women of color in leadership roles as they are navigating change and transitions, either in the workplace or in their personal lives. And so I'm happy to do this work because I know how impactful it has been for me. So I would be happy to chat with you anytime.
Awesome. And all of her information will be in the show notes. And of course, we'll be promoting it. So you'll get the opportunity to connect with Maygene. But this is our episode. Thank you guys so much for listening. You can follow us or see other clips about the podcast on Instagram or LinkedIn at Join the Climb. Until next time, keep climbing and keep striving. I'll see you later.
I think it's
All right.
Go ahead.